Hey guys, I just drove this thing 2,000 miles across the country to bring it back home to us here in Colorado, and I think that this is an undiscovered collector car that you should know about. We are here in Baltimore, Maryland, me, Brendan, and Grant behind the camera from our marketing team, because we actually bought a car from TFL Bids, or off of TFL Bids, and we thought it would make a great addition to our fleet and that you all would love to see some videos on it. And it's a super, super rare car. It's one of only 200 made for the entire world. All right, so we have made it. And look at this beautiful Trans Am. This thing is so cool. And I'll be honest, the pictures almost didn't do this thing justice because it looks so nice. Not only that, but it comes with an entirely extra set of wheels. But walking around on this thing, I'm taking a look. There is very little scratches on this, if any at all. No dents. I'm not seeing any rust, even though we're out here on the East Coast. These tires seem to be in pretty good shape. I think they should make it for our long drive back to Colorado. And then looking at the interior of this thing, holy cow. You don't even see like any tears on the leather or anything. It is really, really cool to find a 95 Trans Am in this kind of condition. I've seen a lot of F-body cars in my time, but never one this nice. So this is a 1995 Pontiac Trans Am, but it is not just any Pontiac Trans Am. This has the Comp TA package, which is super rare. They are intended to make 200 of them, but because you had to be in the know back in the 90s, they actually only ended up making 164 because they were special order only vehicles. And so only 164 people actually plunked down their money to order this from 1995 to 1997, and that makes this one of the rarest muscle cars you can buy. So this was done with the partnership over at SLP, where they took a bone stock V8 Trans Am and slapped a lot of good stuff on it. And this was because they wanted to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the BF Goodwrench Comp TA tires. So every single one of these from the factory came with those Comp TA tires, and it even said so right here on the headlight, which is a pop-up headlight. And then they all came with this composite hood with a Ram Air hood scoop hiding some goodness underneath. Yeah, so looking at this thing, getting it out in the light, man, the paint on this thing is so nice. I cannot get over how good it looks. Firing this thing up, man. Gosh, that thing, I swear, it like turns on like a brand new car. And if you look at that, I mean, I've got the parking brake on and my seatbelt is off. Those are the only lights on there, but otherwise this thing is mint. And look at that, it's even got a cool little, is it a fuel gauge over there as well? It does have an aftermarket head unit, but look at that cool little Hirsch shifter. And then of course the Comp TA floor mats come with it as well. And then we got our gear in the back and 5 extra wheels. So the owner actually recommended that we stop at this place just down the street from his house called Jack's Grill to get some pit beef. And I didn't know what to expect, but holy cow, it was so good. So if you're out in the Maryland area, this thing is like, it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We're like a half hour north of Baltimore. You should check out Jack's Grill. Awesome pit beef, and get it with the tiger sauce too. Good stuff.
So this is Jake's Grill.
I'll have to redo the whole thing. All right. So opening the hood, the first thing you will notice is that Ram air hood scoop is functional, feeding air right into this front-mounted Ram air filter. And that goes into the 5.7 liter LT1 V8 engine that you would also see in the Corvette. But with that additional Ram air, this thing bumped it up to 300 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque. The interesting thing about this is one of the rare instances where GM allowed one of their bargain muscle cars to actually be faster than the base model Corvette. All right, guys, just a little update from the road. We've made it about 3 hours. We crossed over into Pennsylvania from Maryland, and this thing is doing pretty well, I would say. I think we've determined that the tires kind of feel like rocks driving underneath us. They are pretty hard, and the ride on this thing is super harsh. It may also need some suspension work, but I don't know. I guess we'll have it looked at when we get it back, but it's driving fine. The cruise control actually works, which is really nice. And yeah, this thing is going up and down these hills in western Pennsylvania with ease, no problem. But I'll give you an update in a little bit. All right, guys, it has been about 9.5 hours. We have gone 580 miles thus far. We are here in Indianapolis, stopping for dinner at Portillo's, which is, oh, it's a super special place to me. Growing up as a boy just outside of Chicago. If you're from Chicago, you know about this place. But if not, I'm going to show you just why this place is so good. As far as the car goes, it's been doing well. Pretty much the same thing. We're a little bit worried about these tires that seem to be slowly falling apart a little bit. And we've now found out that the passenger side window is happy to go down, not so happy to go back up. So we're going to have to leave that one alone and hopefully fix it when we get back. So every single Comp TA came with this ground effects kit that made it look really menacing and great. And they all came with this silver paint job, as well as the dark gray stripe going down the center of it. So this one has a fuel pressure gauge that looks like they took out one of the air vents and replaced it with this fuel pressure gauge. Now, I don't know if that is a factory option or not, or if that is done aftermarket. You guys will have to let me know in the comments down below, but all of them did come with this Hurst 6-speed shifter that is very smooth and crisp, and I just love driving it with this thing. And then a hearken to how special these are. They got the Comp TA numbered plaque, so this is number 43 out of the intended 200 that they were wanting to build. And it covers your ashtray. Of course, it wouldn't be a 90s vehicle if it had an ashtray center mounted and prominent. And then, of course, just like a lot of the Trans Ams of the 90s, you get some awesome T-top roof. Now, hopping into this 90s Firebird, it is typical GM from the mid-90s. The buttons on here are very large and very chunky. They almost look like play school buttons. Even the buttons on the window are very much the same. Now, the radio in here is not factory, but if you did have the factory radio, it had those big, same chunky buttons. And then these, I think, are actually kind of interesting. You can twist them any way you could possibly imagine to get that air flowing wherever you want it to. Some of the things to look out for I have seen in these old F-bodies is these are actually very prone to break, as well as that dash. If you can see, that dash is huge and it's very expansive. And so if you have a car that's been sitting out in the sun, which clearly this one has not, but it would be cracked all over the place because that is a super common thing to happen. And then in the back seats, you have these two individual bucket seats that, you know, they're not great, but they're not as bad as some of the 90s muscle cars that you would see as well back then. But another thing to keep in mind is you do not have headrests for those back seats either. Last stop, we were definitely a little low on oil. Let's see where we're at. Oh, come on. Yeah, it's looking like only 2 of the 4 dots are filled. So I'm definitely going to add a quart.
How many miles have we gone?
What's that? gosh. I think we've gone 650 miles or so.
Okay.
And we've lost at least a quart of oil in 650 miles. So my guess is this probably isn't going to be the only quart of oil we're going to have to add on this journey. Let's at least get some in there. It's still within operating range, so it's not like it's dangerous or anything, but it's not great for the engine to run it lower on the oil than it needs. Hey guys, it is the next day, and you're gonna have to bear with me a little. I haven't had my morning tea yet, so I'm still waking up out of my slumber, but we did a lot of driving last night, crossing through Illinois and into Missouri, which is where we are now, just outside of St. Louis. We've done a little over 800 miles. We've got a little over 800 miles to go, so we're pretty much at the exact halfway point, and this thing is still running like a champ. We are a little bit concerned about our tires because they are slowly deteriorating as we drive and disintegrating. Hopefully there's enough tread to get us home. Also, when we pulled out of the parking spot this morning, we noticed pretty nice little oil puddle. Now, last night I actually filled this thing with an additional quart of oil because when we pulled the dipstick, we noticed it was quite low. I called my friend last night and kind of told him where we are seeing the oil leak, and he thinks that this may be leaking from the oil pan gasket. And then I told him about the clunk in the back as well, which he informed me is probably just the bump stops. Thankfully, that's going to be probably a pretty cheap fix to do. It might also need suspension in the back, so it's, you know, it's got a few issues and things going on but I mean, this is a 30-year-old car. It's probably spent a lot of time sitting because it's only showing about 105,000 miles on the clock. Now, this is actually a pretty usable car as well, because if you open the back end, you will see you have a ton of space. Now, if you were to remove those T-tops, they actually have spots for it right here in the back, so that way you don't have to worry about storing it in your garage or them getting broken or damaged in any way. And then you also have a way to cover the back as well, and that back seat does fold flat. And we actually got some spare wheels with this thing that came with it, so across that road trip we actually had all 5 wheels in the back of this thing, and they fit just fine. I mean, it made it a little bit tight, but it did fit, and this is a really usable car to own and drive. All right, so let's get this thing fired up and take it out for a spin, because obviously that's the best part about owning a muscle car, right? So, in typical GM fashion, this thing is generally pretty reliable, actually. I mean, I know the LT ones are not as well sought after as the LS ones, which are the ones that came after this, but the LT ones are actually still pretty good motors in their later stages because they kind of figured things out a little bit. Hey guys, I am here in Kansas City, Kansas. Yes, I know the vast majority of Kansas City is in Missouri, but no trip to Kansas City would be complete, for me at least, without a trip to Joe's, the barbecue that is in a gas station. And we have about 600 miles left on our trip, which means we have covered about 1,100 miles, and this thing is still running strong. But boy, am I ready for some Kansas City barbecue. I just finished driving this thing across the country. Now, it was not without problems. First problem being these tires are super old and feel like I am driving on bricks. Second of all, the oil on this doesn't want to stay in it. I think it's got probably an oil pan gasket leak from the front end. Now, I'm just guessing here. I don't entirely know that for certain because we have not gotten it to our mechanic yet, but considering where it's wet underneath, that would be my best guess. And a few times across the trip, I had to actually top this thing off just to make sure that we were running this thing with the proper amount of oil. But as far as the actual driving experience of this, it is like a muscle car. I mean, even compared to some of the older muscle cars, right? They are big and burly, and they feel long, and they feel empowering, and like they have a strong presence on the road. And then when you give it the beans, woo, it just spins those tires and it takes off on you. This thing feels like I'm like growing chest hairs as I'm driving it down the road. It just makes me feel like a man, like I'm a man driving a muscle car, and I love every bit of it. It feels special. It feels great. I mean, especially out here on American roads where most of our roads are wide and straight and we're going stoplight to stoplight. This thing rocks, honestly. On a long road trip, driving 2,000 miles and a little over 26 hours in it, I was wiped. This thing is exhausting. It's pretty noisy once you get it up on the highway. Now, I think a lot of that is probably these old tires don't help with the road noise, but considering you have T-tops up here and you don't have sound deadening right above you or right above the passenger, you're getting a lot of the road noise that's going on while you're driving, and a lot of wind noise whooshing over this thing as well. But overall, I mean, it's really nice, honestly. For a 90s GM car, it takes turns fairly well. It's fairly planted. It's easy to whip the tail out on this thing and do burnouts. And, you know, I can see why everybody would love to take this thing to the drag strip and do stoplight to stoplight drag racing, because it is egging you on to do that. And it's a really cool experience, and all of you should go out there. And if you haven't experienced a true muscle car experience, this one will give it to you. So if you have a rare collector car, head on over to tflbids.com, click that submit thing. We make it super fast and simple. It's only a 5-minute process, and I personally will look at your submission and see if we can get your car sold faster than any other automotive auction site. And for everything else, head over to alltfl.com. This has been Brendan and Alex behind the camera. Take care, guys.